Hello and welcome to Her Revenge Arc. I am your storyteller, and tonight, we delve into a world shimmering with false gold and veiled deceits. It's a place where love becomes a long con, and justice is not found in a courtroom, but in the silent, digital whisper of a single well-placed email. The story you are about to hear is one of profound betrayal, but it is also a testament to the quiet strength that grows in the ruins of a broken heart. It's a story about a woman who discovered the man she loved was living a double life, and how she used the architecture of his own deception to bring his gilded empire crashing down. So find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and listen closely. The story is just beginning. My life with Julian was, for a very long time, a masterpiece of curated perfection. If you were to look at it from the outside, you would see a portrait of modern success, a harmonious composition of ambition and affection. We lived in a penthouse apartment that overlooked the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the urban sprawl like a living, breathing work of art. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. The colors were a palette of muted grays, creams, and charcoals, punctuated by the occasional bold statement piece Julian had acquired on one of his business trips. He was a man who understood aesthetics, who believed that one's environment was a direct reflection of one's inner state. For 7 years, I believed our environment reflected a shared state of elegant tranquility and boundless potential. I was, of course, devastatingly wrong. I am an archivist by profession, a keeper of histories both public and private. My work is methodical, patient, and deeply rooted in the belief that truth resides in the details. I spend my days surrounded by the scent of aging paper and preservation chemicals, my fingers tracing the faded ink of forgotten letters, my eyes deciphering the narratives hidden within ledgers and photographs. I find patterns in chaos. I construct timelines from fragments. It is a quiet profession, one that suits my temperament. I am not a loud person. My strength has never been in confrontation, but in observation and analysis. Julian used to call me his little historian, a term of endearment I once cherished. I see the irony in it now. He never imagined that the skills I honed in the dusty silence of the archives would one day be turned upon him, used to excavate the truth buried beneath the foundations of our life. We met at a university fundraiser. I was there as a junior archivist for the university's special collections, standing awkwardly by a display of rare manuscripts. He was there as a rising star in the world of venture capital, a donor whose name was already being whispered with a mixture of awe and envy. He moved through the room with an effortless grace, a magnetic pull that drew people into his orbit. He wasn't classically handsome in a way that would stop traffic, but he possessed a compelling charisma, an intensity in his dark eyes that made you feel as though you were the only person in the world when he spoke to you. He approached my little display, feigning an interest in a 17th-century botanical atlas. "It's remarkable," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "The level of detail, the patience it must have taken." He wasn't looking at the book, he was looking at me. That was Julian's gift. He knew how to see people, or at least how to make them believe they were seen. We talked for over an hour, oblivious to the networking and champagne flutes clinking around us. He was fascinated by my work, asking insightful questions that went beyond polite curiosity. I was captivated by his quick mind and the way he seemed to value my quiet world as much as his own fast-paced one. By the end of the night, he had my number, and I had a dizzying sense of having been discovered, like a rare manuscript pulled from a forgotten shelf and finally brought into the light. Our courtship was a whirlwind of grand gestures and intimate moments. He would send a card to my modest apartment to whisk me away to a Michelin-starred restaurant. The next day, he would show up at the archives with 2 cups of coffee and a pastry, content to sit in silence with me on my lunch break. He remembered the name of my cat, the title of the obscure book I was reading, the fact that I preferred rainy days to sunny ones. He seemed to weave his life around mine, seamlessly integrating his world of high-stakes finance with my world of historical preservation. He loved to tell me he was building an empire for us. His work involved risk, high-pressure deals, and what he called calculated gambles. I didn't understand the specifics of it, the complex terminology of puts, calls, and leveraged buyouts, but I understood his passion. It was a fire in him, a relentless drive to win. And for a long time, I was his sanctuary, the calm harbor where his ship could rest after navigating the turbulent seas of the market. "You ground me, Alara," he would say, his head in my lap as I ran my fingers through his thick, dark hair. "You're the only real thing in a world of illusions." The irony of that statement now is so profound it feels like a physical weight in my chest. The casino entered our lives about 3 years into the relationship. It started as a form of recreation, a way for him to decompress. He favored one place in particular, the Aurelian Grand. It was a monument to opulence and excess, a sprawling complex of shimmering gold leaf, Italian marble, and cascading crystal chandeliers. The air inside was a carefully calibrated mixture of expensive perfume, fine cigar smoke, and the subtle electric hum of possibility. It was a place designed to make you forget the outside world, to suspend your disbelief and your better judgment. I went with him a few times in the beginning. I found it overwhelming, a sensory assault. The endless chiming of slot machines, the low murmur of the crowds, the almost desperate intensity on the faces of the gamblers. It felt like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of chance. And I have never been a person who believes in luck. I believe in cause and effect. I believe in evidence. Julian, however, thrived there. He wasn't a frantic, sweaty-palmed gambler. He was the opposite. He was calm, focused, almost serene. He played high-stakes blackjack and poker, sitting at the private tables in the exclusive VIP lounges. He treated it like an extension of his job, a complex algorithm to be solved. And he was good at it. Incredibly good. He never seemed to have a bad night. He would come home in the early hours of the morning, smelling faintly of whiskey and victory, and slide a few high-denomination chips onto the nightstand. "For us," he'd whisper, kissing my forehead. I didn't question it. His success at the casino seemed just another facet of his brilliance. Another testament to his ability to master any system he encountered. His winnings became a significant, though undeclared, part of our income. They funded extravagant vacations to Bali and the Amalfi Coast, paid for the custom-tailored suits that filled his closet, and bought the ridiculously expensive, minimalist art that adorned our walls. Our life was beautiful, and it was built in part on the winnings from the Aurelian Grand. I accepted it as part of the package, part of the life with the brilliant, charismatic man who had chosen me. And so, for 7 years I lived inside this carefully constructed reality. I organized our life, managed our home, and provided the quiet, stable backdrop against which his dazzling successes could play out. I cataloged his triumphs in my mind the way I cataloged historical documents at work. I loved him. Or more accurately, I loved the man I believed him to be. I loved the story we had written together. But stories, like historical records, can be incomplete. They can be censored. They can be deliberate fabrications. And my historian's instinct, long dormant in my personal life, was about to awaken. It started not with a bang, but with the faintest whisper of a discrepancy, a detail that didn't fit the narrative. It started with the scent of a perfume that wasn't mine. It was a Tuesday. I remember the day with photographic clarity because it was the day the first crack appeared in the foundation of my world. Julian had come home late, around 2 a.m. This was not unusual. His casino nights, as he called them, often stretched into the early morning. I was asleep, but the sound of the front door clicking shut stirred me. He slipped into bed, his body cool from the night air. He wrapped an arm around me, his customary gesture, and mumbled a sleepy, "I missed you." I murmured something back, half asleep, and snuggled closer. And that's when I smelled it. A fragrance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible beneath the familiar scents of his cologne, the faint aroma of whiskey, and the crisp night air clinging to his coat. But it was there. It was a floral scent, complex and expensive, with notes of jasmine and something warmer, like sandalwood. It was most certainly not my perfume. I wore a single simple scent, a light citrus-based fragrance I had used for a decade. This was its opposite, heady, sensual, and utterly foreign. For a moment my mind refused to process it. It was just a stray scent, I told myself. He must have stood next to a woman at the tables, or brushed past someone in the elevator. The casino was full of people wearing all kinds of perfumes. It meant nothing. I forced myself to relax, to accept this logical explanation, to drift back to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind, the part of me that looks for patterns and anomalies, was now wide awake. The scent was not just on his coat. It was on the collar of his shirt, on his skin, in his hair. It was the scent of an embrace. The next morning I said nothing. I watched him as he moved around the kitchen, making coffee, his movements crisp and efficient as always. He seemed completely normal. He smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and talked about a deal he was closing. I felt a surreal sense of detachment, as if I were watching a film of my own life. Was I imagining it? Was I becoming paranoid? I hated the person this suspicion was turning me into. But the archivist in me couldn't let it go. An anomaly once noted must be investigated. That afternoon, while he was at work, I went to his closet. I picked up the suit jacket he had worn the night before. I brought it to my face and inhaled deeply. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. Jasmine and sandalwood. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was real. This single sensory detail became the starting point of a silent, obsessive investigation. I began to notice other things, tiny inconsistencies I had previously dismissed. There were the phone calls he would take in the other room, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. If I walked in, he would end the call abruptly, saying it was just a tedious work matter. There were the text messages that he would angle his phone away from me to read. A small, almost unconscious gesture that now seemed glaringly significant. Once a credit card bill arrived. I was the one who managed our household accounts, a task I had taken on willingly. I was scanning the itemized list when a charge caught my eye. Bijoux de nuit, Itrid. A charge for several $1,000s at a high-end lingerie boutique. I knew for a fact he had never bought me lingerie from there, or anywhere for that matter. Our intimacy had become comfortable routine. Expensive lace was not part of its vocabulary. When I asked him about it, he was so smooth, so convincing. He laughed it off. Oh, that. It was a gag gift for a colleague's bachelor party. Ridiculous, I know. You wouldn't believe the stuff they make you buy. He said it with such casual disdain that I felt foolish for even asking. I wanted to believe him. It was so much easier to believe him than to face the alternative. So I filed the receipt away, but the name of the store was logged in my memory. The small lies began to accumulate, forming a sedimentary layer over the truth. He claimed to be at a late-night meeting with investors from Singapore, but a quick, discreet check of his office's online meeting schedule showed no such event. He said he had dinner with a college friend named Mark, but when I ran into Mark's wife a week later, she mentioned Mark had been out of town on business all that month. Each lie was a small tremor, and the cracks in my perfect life were growing wider. My home, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a museum of a dead relationship. Every object seemed to mock me. The beautiful vase on the mantelpiece, a gift from our 5th anniversary, now felt hollow. The photograph on the bedside table of us smiling on a beach in Thailand felt like a portrait of two strangers. I started to feel like a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms where I was once happy, invisible to the man who lived there with me. The emotional toll was immense. I was living a double life of my own. On the surface, I was the same calm, supportive Alara. I made dinner, I asked about his day, I smiled at his jokes. But underneath, I was a detective, a spy in the house of love. I felt a constant low-grade nausea. I lost weight. Sleep became a refuge I could rarely find. I would lie awake at night, next to the warm, breathing body of the man I loved, and feel an ocean of coldness between us. The silence in our apartment was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with unspoken words and ugly truths. The confirmation of the affair, when it finally came, was almost a relief. It was a digital footprint, as is so often the case in our modern world. Julian was an early adopter of all things tech. He loved smart devices, cloud storage, the seamless integration of his digital and physical life. He had a shared family cloud account that was supposed to be for our photos, documents, and travel plans. He had set it up years ago and, in his arrogance, had likely forgotten the extent of what was being automatically synced. I was searching for a tax document one evening when I stumbled upon a folder I didn't recognize. It was cryptically named JA Projections. Curious, thinking it was work-related, I clicked on it. It wasn't financial projections. It was a folder of photographs. And not our photographs. The woman in the pictures was stunning. She had long flowing black hair, high cheekbones, and a smile that was both sultry and playful. She was the kind of woman who commands attention the moment she enters a room. They were in various locations. A sun-drenched balcony overlooking the sea, a dimly lit cocktail bar, an opulent hotel room that was definitely not one we had ever shared. In every photo she was with Julian. They were not just standing next to each other. They were kissing, laughing, holding each other with an intimacy that was a physical blow to my solar plexus. He was looking at her with the same intensity he had once reserved for me. My breath left my body in a silent gasp. The world tilted on its axis. The air in the room grew thick and hard to breathe. I clicked through the photos, my hand shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. There were dozens of them, a complete, documented history of a parallel life. A life filled with passion and spontaneity and romance. A life he was living behind my back. Then I saw a photo that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was the woman Serafina, as I would later learn her name was, posing in a mirror. She was wearing a black lace teddy. It was from Bijou de Nuit, the gag gift. And then the final piece of the puzzle. The date stamps on the photos. They corresponded perfectly with his late-night meetings, his business trips, his dinners with Mark. One set of photos was from a trip to Monaco. I remembered that week vividly. He had told me he was at a tech conference in Austin. He had called me every night, his voice filled with feigned exhaustion, telling me how much he missed me. Looking at the photo of him and Serafina on a yacht, their arms around each other, a bottle of champagne on the table between them, I felt a kind of cold, clarifying rage I had never experienced before. It wasn't just a fling. The sheer number of photos spanning a period of at least 2 years told me that this was a relationship, a second secret life. I was not his sanctuary. I was his alibi. I was the stable, predictable foundation that allowed him to build his fantasy life with her. The thought was so humiliating, so utterly debasing, that it burned away the grief and left behind something hard and sharp. I closed the laptop. I sat there in the dark, the city lights twinkling outside the window, and I felt the last 7 years of my life crumble into dust. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a fiction, a character Julian had created for my benefit. And I, the archivist, the keeper of history, had been living in a forgery. The initial shock gave way to a strange and terrible calm. The kind of calm that comes after a hurricane has passed, when you are left to survey the wreckage. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. My methodical brain, the part of me that had been dormant, took over. The question was no longer, is he cheating on me? The question was, what do I do now? A confrontation felt pointless, demeaning. What would it achieve? He would lie. He would gaslight me. He would tell me I was crazy, that I was misinterpreting things. Or worse, he would admit it, and I would be subjected to a torrent of pathetic excuses and pleas for forgiveness. I deserved more than that. I deserved more than a messy, tear-filled scene that would only grant him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. My mind went back to the archives. When you discover a document is a forgery, you don't scream at it. You meticulously document its inconsistencies. You analyze the materials, the ink, the handwriting. You build an irrefutable case. And then you expose it. You reclassify it. You strip it of its power to deceive. And that's when a new thought began to form. A cold, clear thought that pushed aside the pain and humiliation. Julian's entire life was built on deception. The affair was just one layer of it. What other lies was he telling? The question hung in the air, shimmering with a dark and compelling energy. My grief was transforming. It was hardening into a new kind of purpose. I was no longer a victim surveying the wreckage. I was an investigator at a crime scene. And the investigation had just begun. In the days that followed my discovery, I moved through our apartment like a ghost. I performed the rituals of our life together with the chilling, automated precision. I made coffee. I picked up his dry cleaning. I listened to his stories about work. But I was no longer present. I was an observer, a data collector. My heart had been cauterized by the truth, and in its place a cold, analytical curiosity was growing. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache beneath the surface, but it was no longer my primary motivator. My focus had shifted from the who and why of his infidelity to the how of his entire existence. How did he sustain this elaborate lie? Julian, wrapped in the thick blanket of his own arrogance, noticed nothing. He saw my quietness as my usual placid nature. He mistook my detachment for contentment. He was so confident in the architecture of his deceit that he couldn't imagine anyone, least of all his quiet, unassuming Alara, would ever think to look at the blueprints. This was his greatest mistake. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten what I did for a living. My investigation began not with his heart, but with his wallet. The affair must have been expensive. Serafina looked like a woman who appreciated the finer things in life. The trips, the gifts, the dinner set all had to be funded. I knew his salary from his venture capital firm. It was substantial, but was it enough to maintain 2 lavish lifestyles, one of which was a complete secret? I started with the documents I had access to: bank statements, credit card bills, investment portfolios. I created a new secret spreadsheet on my personal laptop, a place far from the prying eyes of our shared cloud. I began to track every expenditure, every transfer, every anomaly. It was meticulous, painstaking work, not unlike tracing the provenance of a historical artifact. I quickly found a pattern. There were large, regular cash withdrawals, thousands of dollars at a time, always taken from ATMs near the Aurelian Grand. When I cross-referenced the dates of these withdrawals with his calendar, they often coincided with his casino nights. This was not surprising. He needed cash for the tables, but the amounts were staggering, far more than what one would carry for a night of recreation. Then there was the matter of his winnings. He always claimed to win, and often showed me the proof in the form of high-value casino chips. But when I looked at our bank accounts, I couldn't find a corresponding pattern of large deposits. Where was all that money going? He paid for our vacations and his expensive toys, yes, but the numbers didn't add up. There was a significant gap between his declared winnings and our visible expenditures. A black hole in his finances. My suspicion began to pivot. The affair was a brutal betrayal, but it was a crime of the heart. This financial discrepancy felt different, felt professional. It felt connected to the core of who he was, a man who gamed systems. My attention turned fully to the Aurelian Grand. It was the nexus of everything. It was where he went to decompress. It was where he made the money that funded his secret life. It was the one part of his world I knew the least about. I needed to understand it. I needed to understand his relationship with it. I started my research online, devouring everything I could find about the casino. I read about its history, its ownership by a shadowy global conglomerate, its reputation for catering to the highest of high rollers. I read articles about casino security, learning about the thousands of cameras, the use of facial recognition software, the eye in the sky that monitored every single hand dealt. I learned about the complex algorithms casinos used to track players, to rate them, to identify potential card counters or cheats. The Aurelian Grand, according to multiple sources, had one of the most sophisticated security systems in the world. It was a digital fortress. Cheating a place like that seemed impossible. Card counting could get you banned, but it wouldn't generate the kind of consistent, massive winnings Julian seemed to enjoy. Colluding with the dealer was risky and unlikely to go unnoticed for long. So what was he doing? The answer, I suspected, lay in technology. Julian was a technophile. He loved gadgets. His office was a testament to this, filled with the latest computers, smart devices, and strange little pieces of equipment whose purpose I didn't understand. I had always tuned it out as part of his world. Now I saw it as a potential arsenal. One evening, while he was out at the casino, Sadie entered his home office. The room, usually a symbol of his power and intellect, now felt like the heart of his secret kingdom. I felt a tremor of fear, the fear of a trespasser, but I pushed it down. I was no longer a guest in this life. I was an auditor. I started by examining his desk. It was neat, organized. A powerful custom-built PC hummed quietly. I didn't dare try to access it. His password discipline was impeccable. Instead, I looked for physical clues. In a drawer beneath a stack of mundane paperwork, I found a small velvet-lined box. It wasn't a jewelry box. It was a case for cufflinks. Inside, nestled in the black velvet, were several pairs of exquisite cufflinks. One pair, however, was different. They were simple brushed silver discs. They looked elegant but unremarkable. But as I picked one up, I noticed its weight was slightly off. It felt a little heavier than a solid piece of silver should. I turned it over and over in my fingers. My archivist's eye, trained to spot imperfections and alterations, saw something. On the very edge of the disc, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny, perfectly circular pinprick. It wasn't a flaw in the metal. It was a hole so small you could barely fit a needle through it. My heart began to beat faster. I held it up to the light. It looked like a lens.
A microscopic camera lens.
Suddenly, a dozen fragmented memories clicked into place. Julian always wore cufflinks with his suits. He had a habit, when he was concentrating at the blackjack table, of resting his chin on his hand, his wrist held steady, his cufflink pointing directly at the dealer's hands. He was always so particular about which pair he wore to the casino, always choosing these simple silver ones. He had told me they were his lucky cufflinks. The idea was audacious, almost unbelievable. Was he filming the cards as they were being dealt? But to what end? Even if he had a video feed, how could he process it in real time? How could it give him an advantage? My search became more frantic. I looked through his drawers, his bookshelves, behind his desk. In a box in his closet, buried under old sweaters, I found a collection of electronic components. Small circuit boards, tiny wires, a few strange-looking receivers. It looked like a hobbyist's kit. But one item stood out. A small flat device no bigger than a credit card with a subtle adhesive backing. It was designed to be hidden. I examined it closely. It had no screen, no buttons, just a small charging port. I had seen him charging a similar device once, and when I asked what it was, he'd said it was the portable battery booster for his phone. Another casual, plausible lie. I didn't know what it did, but I knew it was part of the system.
A camera in a cufflink.
A receiver hidden somewhere on his body, but there was still a missing piece. The processing. The brain of the operation. Filming the cards was one thing. Analyzing the data to predict outcomes was another. That would require immense computing power and a sophisticated algorithm. Couldn't be happening on his phone or on that small receiver. It had to be happening somewhere else. My mind went back to his computer. I couldn't access it, but maybe I didn't need to. I thought about the cloud. He was so confident in the cloud. He had bragged about a private server he leased for his freelance data analysis projects. He said it gave him the raw power he needed to run financial models. Another lie. I went back to our shared cloud account, the place where I had found the photos of Serafina. I felt sick returning to that digital graveyard, but I forced myself. I began to sift through the folders again, this time looking for technical files, not personal ones. I searched for anything related to data analysis, projections, or the name of the private server company he had mentioned. And then I found it. It wasn't in a folder. It was in the trash. He must have deleted it, thinking it was gone forever. But like most cloud systems, deleted files linger for a period of time before being permanently purged. It was a log file, a simple text file, filled with lines of code and timestamps. I didn't understand most of it. It was technical jargon, programming commands, but I saw a few key phrases repeated over and over again. I saw video _stream _input. I saw shuffle _pattern _recognition _7.3. I saw card _sequence _analysis. And most chillingly, I saw haptic signal. My blood ran cold. I sat back in his expensive leather chair and pieced it all together. It was a system of breathtaking ingenuity and criminality. The camera in the cufflink streamed a live video of the card shoe, and the dealer's shuffle to his private, off-site server. A powerful custom-written program on that server analyzed the shuffle. Most modern casinos use continuous shuffling machines, but in the high roller rooms, for the sake of tradition and the illusion of fairness, they still use multi-deck hand shuffles. These shuffles, while complex, are performed by humans. And humans, no matter how well trained, are creatures of habit. They develop subtle unconscious patterns in their movements, tells in their shuffling rhythm. Julian's algorithm was designed to recognize these microscopic patterns. It analyzed the video feed, broke down the shuffle, and calculated the probable distribution of high and low cards throughout the deck. It couldn't predict the exact next card, but it could tell him, with a high degree of statistical certainty, when the deck was hot rich in tens and aces. And the final piece, haptic_output signal. The small flat device hidden on his body, the receiver. It didn't beep or flash. It vibrated. A simple silent signal. A gentle buzz against his skin to tell him bet now, or a double buzz to say bet big. It was a silent, invisible technological tap on the shoulder. It was brilliant. It was untraceable by standard casino security. They were looking for card counters, colluding dealers, or hidden cards. They weren't looking for a man who had outsourced his brain to a supercomputer 1,000 miles away. A man who was receiving psychic predictions through his skin. I stared at the computer screen, my mind reeling. The sheer arrogance of it. The complexity. The years of development it must have taken. This wasn't just about money. This was about proving he was smarter than everyone else. Smarter than the casino. Smarter than their multi-million-dollar security systems. And smarter than me. The quiet archivist who was supposed to be tending to the garden of his domestic life while he conquered the world. He hadn't just cheated on me. He was cheating the entire world. His entire life was a fraud. The venture capital job was his respectable front. The affair with Serafina was his private indulgence. And the casino was his personal mint, printing money through a system of pure, unadulterated deception. Our life, our penthouse, our vacations, it was all funded by a colossal ongoing crime. I closed the log file and restored it from the trash, moving it to a hidden folder of my own. I took photographs of the cufflink, the receiver, the components in the closet. I documented everything with the cold, dispassionate precision of my profession. I now had 2 complete, irrefutable dossiers, one on his infidelity and one on his felony. The first one had broken my heart. The second one gave me my power back. The grief I had felt was now completely gone, burned away by the white-hot flame of this discovery. The pain of his affair with Serafina now seemed almost quaint, a petty personal drama compared to the sheer scale of this deception. He hadn't just betrayed me as a lover. He had made me an unwitting accomplice to his crimes. I was living off stolen money. The thought filled me with a profound, cleansing disgust. I sat in his office for a long time, the evidence laid out before me on my secret drive. I had the power to destroy him. A simple phone call to the police. An anonymous tip to the casino security division. But how to do it? How to execute this without getting caught in the blast radius myself? I had lived with him for 7 years. My name was on our joint accounts. I could be implicated, dragged through a messy public legal battle. I needed a solution that was as elegant, precise, and anonymous as his own system of cheating. My mind, now operating with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, began to work on a new kind of project. Not the preservation of history, but its deliberate, targeted demolition. I wasn't going to have a confrontation. I wasn't going to cry or scream. I was going to write a report. A final, devastating report. And I knew exactly who the recipient would be. The days leading up to the end were the strangest of my life. I lived with the man I now saw as a complete stranger. A criminal mastermind hiding in plain sight. I watched him get dressed for his casino nights, carefully selecting his lucky silver cufflinks, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The love was gone, the grief was gone. Even the anger had subsided, replaced by a resolute sense of purpose. I was an architect of a different kind now, designing the scaffold from which he would fall. My plan needed to be flawless. It had to be untraceable, leaving no path back to me. Julian's downfall had to appear as if it came from the all-seeing eye of the casino itself, a testament to their own security prowess, not the work of a scorned woman. My revenge would not be loud and messy. It would be a quiet, efficient whisper that would dismantle his entire world. I spent 3 days composing my weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a gun. It was an email. But it was the most carefully crafted document of my entire life. Every word was chosen with surgical precision. My goal was not to sound like a jilted lover. I had to sound like a professional, perhaps a disgruntled former employee of his, or a rival hacker who had stumbled upon his scheme. The tone had to be dry, factual, and slightly contemptuous, as if pointing out a security flaw that should have been obvious to a competent professional. I started by creating a new, anonymous email address. I used a public library computer 2 towns over, paying for my time in cash. I used a VPN and the Tor browser, layering my anonymity so thickly that tracing it would be virtually impossible. The email address itself was sterile. security.breached@intel@protonmail.com. No emotion, no personality. Just business. The recipient was the crucial part. I didn't send it to a generic info at or security at address that would be monitored by a low-level employee. I spent hours online on professional networking sites and in the deep archives of business journals to find the name of the one person who would have the power and the incentive to act immediately and decisively. I found him. Marcus Thorne, the head of global security for the parent corporation of the Aurelian Grand. His online profile painted a picture of a ruthless ex-military intelligence officer who had built his career on being infallible. He was a man who would view a security breach not just as a financial loss, but as a personal insult. He was the perfect audience. The subject line of the email was simple and alarming. Urgent. Unidentified high-stakes system exploit at Aurelian Grand. Then I wrote the body of the email. I laid out the facts with the detached clarity of a technical report. I never once used Julian's name. He was referred to only as the asset. Mr. Thorne, I began, I am writing to inform you of a significant and ongoing security vulnerability at your Aurelian Grand property. For approximately 2 years, an individual hereafter referred to as the asset has been successfully exploiting a flaw in your high-stakes blackjack tables. The financial loss to your organization is estimated to be in the 8-figure range. I then broke down the system piece by piece just as I had discovered it. I didn't reveal how I knew. I presented it as a result of my own analysis. The method is a sophisticated blend of microtechnology and remote computational analysis. Data capture. The asset utilizes a custom-built microcamera, concealed within a common personal effect. I suggest a detailed sweep of cufflinks, tie pins, and rings worn by your high rollers. This camera provides a high-fidelity video stream of the dealer's hand shuffle procedure. Remote analysis. The video stream is transmitted to a private, off-site server. A proprietary algorithm, which I have designated Shuffle Pattern Recognition version 7.3, based on recovered log fragments, analyzes the shuffle in real time. It identifies subconscious dealer tells and micropatterns to predict the distribution of high-value versus low-value cards with a statistical accuracy exceeding 90% in later stages of the shoe. Silent signaling. The server sends a haptic signal to a discrete receiver worn by the asset on his person. This signal of vibration instructs the asset on when to increase or decrease his bets. The system is silent, invisible, and circumvents all of your traditional countermeasures which focus on player behavior and card counting. To give my claims irrefutable credibility, I added specific, verifiable details. The asset's primary target is Blackjack Table 7 in the Sovereign Club VIP Lounge. He favors dealers with over 10 years of experience, as their muscle memory is more ingrained, and thus more predictable for the algorithm. I would direct your surveillance team to review footage from the past 6 months, specifically focusing on a male patron who consistently wears simple, brushed silver cufflinks, and who has an unusually high win rate that defies statistical probability. Pay close attention to his betting patterns. They will correlate perfectly with the richness of the shoe post-shuffle. As a final piece of evidence, I have attached a small, heavily redacted fragment of a server log file which demonstrates the system in action. The IP address of the server has been scrubbed, but the operational language is clear. I attached the small log file I had recovered from Julian's deleted items, carefully editing out any information that could potentially be traced back to him personally before I sent it to the casino. I wanted them to do the work of identifying him, I wanted them to feel the thrill of the hunt, to catch him themselves. It would make his capture all the more certain. My closing was cold and professional. I trust you have the resources to handle this discreetly. My interest is purely in the intellectual challenge of the problem. I will not be contacting you again. I read the email over and over again 20 times, 30 times. It was perfect. It was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. It gave them everything they needed, the what, the how, and the where. It flattered their egos by presenting it as a puzzle for them to solve, and it protected me completely. The night I chose to send it was a Friday. Julian was getting ready to go out. He put on one of his expensive suits, a deep charcoal gray. He opened his cufflink box. My breath caught in my throat. He reached for the silver pair. His lucky ones. It was perfect. A poetic final irony. "Have a good night," I said, my voice even and calm. I kissed his cheek the same way I had for 7 years. The gesture felt hollow. An echo from a life that was already over. The skin of his cheek felt like a stranger's. "I will," he said, smiling his brilliant, confident smile. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." "I won't," I said. It was the truest thing I had said to him in months. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the silent apartment. I waited for an hour, letting him get settled at his table, letting him get comfortable in his web of deceit. Then I took my laptop, drove to the same library 2 towns over, paid in cash and logged on. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened my anonymous email account. The draft was sitting there, waiting. I reread it one last time. Then I attached the log file. My finger hovered over the send button. For a fraction of a second, a montage of our 7 years together flashed through my mind. Our first date, the moment he told me he loved me, the trips we took, the home we built. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. There was a faint pang of sadness, not for the man he was, but for the man I had believed him to be, for the woman I was when I believed in him. Then I thought of Serafina. I thought of the lies. I thought of the staggering arrogance of his crimes. I thought of him sitting there at that very moment, in his expensive suit and his camera cufflinks, stealing money without a care in the world, believing he was untouchable. I pressed send. The email disappeared into the ether. A single digital whisper sent out into the vast silent network. I closed the laptop, logged off, and walked out of the library into the cool night air. I felt no rage, no triumph, no glee. I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a task completed. The quiet of a history that had finally been archived, catalogued, and closed. I drove home, made myself a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, I slept through the entire night. I didn't have to wait long. The fallout was not immediate, but when it came, it was spectacular. I knew Marcus Thorne would not act rashly. A man like him would observe, gather evidence, and then strike with overwhelming force. For 3 days, life continued as normal. Julian came and went. He went to the casino one more time during that period on Saturday night. I imagine that was his last visit. I can picture the scene now with a cinematographer's clarity. The eye in the sky was no longer just passively monitoring. It was actively watching him. Every camera in the Sovereign Club was likely focused on Table 7. A team of analysts led by Thorne himself was probably in a back room cross-referencing my email with the live feed. They would have seen it all. The cufflink, glinting under the lights, pointed perfectly at the dealer. His uncanny ability to bet big just before a run of face cards. The subtle way he touched his side or adjusted his waistband, where the receiver was likely hidden. They were no longer watching a gambler. They were watching a thief in the act. They were building their case. The strike came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, surrounded by the peaceful, dusty silence of the archives. Julian was at his office. I know this because he never came home. My first inkling that it had happened was a news alert that flashed on my computer screen. It was from a local financial journal. The headline was stark. Prominent venture capitalist Julian Croft arrested in major casino fraud investigation. I clicked the link, my heart beating a steady rhythmic drum. The article was brief, clearly rushed to press, but the details were explosive. Julian had been arrested at his downtown office. The arrest was not made by local police, but by federal agents. The charges were wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act. The article mentioned that his arrest was the culmination of a swift, intensive investigation by the Security Division of the Aurelian Grants parent corporation, who had then turned their findings over to the FBI. They had uncovered a highly sophisticated technological scheme used to defraud the casino of an amount estimated to be in excess of $10 million. The report praised the casino's security team for their proactive and cutting-edge methods in detecting the anomaly. Marcus Thorne was quoted, his words dripping with corporate self-congratulation. "We invest heavily in protecting the integrity of our games," he said. "Let this be a clear message. Anyone who attempts to defraud our establishments will be identified, investigated, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Not a word about an anonymous tip. My role was completely erased just as I had planned. I was a ghost in the machine. I read the article 3 times, my face a mask of calm neutrality. My colleagues bustled around me, unaware that my world had just detonated and been reborn. I took a deep breath. The air in the archive, filled with the scent of old paper and history, had never smelled so clean. The news exploded over the next few days. It was a major story. The scale of the fraud, the cleverness of the technology, and Julian's high-profile status made it irresistible to the media. His face was everywhere. The confident, charismatic smile in his corporate headshot now looked like the smug smirk of a master criminal. The empire he had been building for us was revealed to be a house of cards, and a single silent gust of wind had brought it all down. They had raided our apartment. The doorman told me about it later, his eyes wide. A team of federal agents had spent hours there, carrying out boxes of evidence. His computers, his files, his gadgets, his expensive suits with their telltale cufflinks. All of it was gone, catalogued as exhibits for the prosecution. They had frozen his assets, all of them. The bank accounts, the investment portfolios, everything. The life of curated perfection we had lived was dismantled and impounded overnight. And what of Serafina? Her name appeared in some of the more salacious gossip columns. She was painted as the siren, the femme fatale. It turned out Julian had set her up in a lavish condo, bought her a car, and showered her with gifts, all with the casino's stolen money. When the money dried up, so did she. She was questioned by the FBI but was not charged. She was just another one of his expensive, discarded acquisitions. She disappeared from the story as quickly as she had entered it, a footnote in the saga of his spectacular downfall. I felt no pity for her, but no malice either. She was simply irrelevant. I never spoke to Julian again. He tried to call me once from prison, but I didn't answer. His lawyer contacted me, but I directed him to my own, whom I had hired with the last of my independent savings. I cooperated fully, but I had little to offer. I was, on paper and in truth, the ignorant partner, completely unaware of the criminal enterprise my boyfriend was running. My quiet nature, my non-involvement in his finances, my separate career, all the things he had taken for granted as signs of my passivity, now served as my shield. I was seen as another victim of his deception. The legal process was long and brutal for him. The evidence was overwhelming. The casino's surveillance footage, the log files from his own server which the FBI easily recovered, the hardware they found in his possession. He had no defense. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have been a media circus. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. He lost everything. His money, his career, his reputation, his freedom. I moved out of the penthouse. I couldn't stand to be in that space, with its minimalist furniture and its ghost-filled memories. I sold what little was legally mine and rented a small, simple apartment in a quiet neighborhood, closer to the archives. It was a space that was entirely my own, filled with my books, my cat, and the peaceful silence that I now cherished. The revenge was complete, but the feeling it left me with was not the fiery satisfaction I might have expected. It was a deep, profound, and cleansing sense of peace. I hadn't destroyed him out of rage. I had simply exposed him. I had held a mirror up to his life, and the world finally saw him for what he was. A forgery. My role was not that of an executioner, but of an archivist, correcting a historical record that had been deliberately falsified. My life is quiet now, but it is my own. The silence is no longer heavy with lies. It is light with possibility. I find joy in the small things. The smell of old books, the warmth of my cat sleeping on my lap, the taste of a simple cup of tea. I restored order to my own narrative. I took a story of betrayal and humiliation and rewrote it as a story of quiet strength and intelligent justice. He built an empire of illusions, and I, his little historian, was the one who finally published the truth. And so his story ends not with a bang, but with the quiet, definitive click of a prison door. My own story, however, was just beginning. It makes me wonder about the nature of justice. Sometimes it's not about shouting from the rooftops or engaging in a fiery confrontation. Sometimes the most satisfying and complete form of revenge is simply allowing a person to be consumed by the intricate machinery of their own deceit. It's about finding the single load-bearing lie and giving it a gentle, anonymous push. I'm curious to know what you think. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where quiet, intelligent action was more powerful than a loud reaction? What does true justice look like to you? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for joining me on her revenge arc. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to the channel for more tales of justice, intelligently served. Until next time, be well and be wise.